A few months ago, when I first thought about creating this channel, I thought I would make this video much later. However, as I reflected more and more on future topics to discuss, I understood that today's video is of such critical importance to my way of thinking that there is no way I can postpone this further. I wanted to talk about personality tests. As you might remember, we started our cooperative journey on this channel with the topic of human suffering. I think that one of the most important aspects in transcending your suffering is understanding yourself. If you know your internal intellectual, psychological, and physiological tendencies, then you will be able to solve the problems in your life that are solvable, but most importantly, you will be able to accept yourself, both with your strengths and weaknesses. In the last decades, personality tests have become a widespread way of an in-depth self-analysis. Personality tests themselves are also an interesting object of reflection. Each of the systems of testing a person carries some ideological premises which make it a political object. There are many classifications and personality tests out there, and I tried many of them, but for me, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI, is my favorite. I bet that you most likely heard about Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI, before. But in case you didn't, I will summarize it very shortly. In essence, MBTI introduces 4 psychological oppositions. Your personality depends on where you stand in these oppositions. Since the oppositions are binary, without any gray zones between them, there is a grand total of 16 personalities. The 4 positions are: first, introversion versus extroversion. This is relatively straightforward. If you gain energy from interaction with other people, then you're an extrovert. If, on the contrary, you need to spend time alone and communication tires you, then you're an introvert. The second opposition is intuition versus sensory. This is about the way you perceive and work with information. Intuitives tend to understand and explain the world through abstract concepts and ideas, tend to dream and philosophize. They are usually the creative ones. Sensory-based personalities are grounded, down to earth. Sensors perceive things precisely as they are. Sensors tend to be present in the moment, collected. Their physical actions are precise. Sensors have great memory and attention for details. The third opposition is thinking versus feeling. The main question here is, how do you make decisions? What is more important for you? Achieving results with speed and effectiveness, or not hurting anyone, emotionally or materially? Do you focus on the bigger picture when you plan or do something, like a thinker, or you prioritize the desires of individual humans and how their lives and emotions would be influenced by your actions, like a feeler? Last one, judging versus perceiving, concerns your level of organization. If you like to have schedules and dislike surprises even if they are pleasant, if you plan everything ahead or prefer to exist in a hierarchy, then you're likely a judger. If you are open to surprises and unknown experiences, if you do not try to have a strict plan and a specific time for everything in your life, if you don't know what you will do tomorrow evening, then you're likely a perceiver. Let me discuss one specific personality type as an example. According to various MBTI tests and my own self-reflections, my personality type is an INTJ, or an architect. The abbreviation INTJ means that I'm introverted, intuitive, thinking, and judging. If you want to describe an architect with simple terms, then you might say that INTJs are reserved and solitary creative thinkers who compose and follow complicated plans to achieve their goals. But MBTI is far more complicated than simply answering 4 questions. Each personality type in MBTI has a selection of cognitive functions. What are those and why do we need them? There are 2 ideas behind cognitive functions. First, there are no absolute introverts or absolute extroverts. Our intuition and sensory, thinking and feeling can be extroverted or introverted as well. In the case of an architect or an INTJ, the dominant function, introverted intuition, is combined with extroverted thinking. The second idea is that the first letter in the type is not really the most important one. Your intuition, sensory, or thinking might be the dominant functions. In the case of the INTJ, you can see that they are, first and foremost, deep visionaries who organize the abstract concepts into complicated, multi-layered intellectual systems. This is what an I, or introverted intuition, means. And second, the INTJs are effective thinkers who tend to place achieving results over achieving absolute intellectual integrity. And this is what extrovert thinking is about. Each personality type also has weaker third and fourth cognitive functions, but we will discuss those at a later date. For now, we only need to outline the basic concepts of MBTI. A very important thing to remember is that your structure of cognitive functions does not mean that you, for example, have an amazing extroverted thinking but completely absent introverted thinking. This is not how MBTI works. You might have both your extroverted and introverted trait developed. The one thing that truly matters is that your introverted or extroverted trait must be stronger. And that's it, these are the basics. I want you to know that I'm very interested in knowing the personality types of my viewers. I've left some links to the relatively good tests that might help you start analyzing yourself through the lens of MBTI. Go through them, but do not take the test's assessments of your personality over your own reflections. I have a theory that most of you, my viewers, are intuitive introverts. Let's get acquainted more closely though, and please write about your personality type in the comments. Maybe I'm wrong. Now that we've established the very basics about the MBTI, let me directly state two ideas that I want to discuss in this video. First, the second opposition of MBTI, or the difference between intuitives and sensors, is the most important difference between human beings in the modern world. I would argue that intuitive sensory difference is even more important than difference of social class and cultural cleavages. Second, I want to prove that the MBTI is the only personality testing system that describes the intuitive sensor cleavage correctly, and because of that, the academic psychology is wrong with preferring another system. Let us begin with one interesting story. For years, I've been using the MBTI not only to self-test, but only to understand others around me. And each time I've tried to type some of my dungeon dweller friends, and then gave them links to tests, every time the tests gave my friends the same type as I originally thought. This means that likely the story I'll tell you corresponds with psychological reality, and I am likely not delusional with my observations. There is a very interesting pattern that happened every time I played open-world cooperative sandbox video games in a group that consisted of 50% of intuitives, or the creative people who philosophize and perceive the world through abstract concepts, and 50% of sensors, grounded people with great attention to details who are present in the moment. It happened in Minecraft, in Terraria, and in Core Keeper. But what exactly happened? Every time my group began to play the game, soon it started to split in terms of occupation. Sensors began exploring caves, mining ores for crafting, and fighting hostile mobs. In other words, sensors focused on progression in a way it was intended by developers. What did the intuitives do? The intuitives started to compose increasingly autistic projects that would require a lot of time investment, but would also result in either a great resource yield, or aesthetically pleasing buildings, or safe and comfortable infrastructure, and other things that are not directly connected to progressing in the game. The intuitives usually construct projects separately from each other, establishing contacts with other people, including other intuitives, only with the intention of showing off and discussing their projects. Each and every time in cooperative playthroughs of Sandbox games, there were two possible results. First result usually happened when some of the sensors wanted to, quote, play together. By playing together, they meant actively going on raids, fighting bosses, and acquiring resources in one group. Sensors slowly grew unsatisfied with Intuitive's building projects that everyone would later benefit from, rather than doing the same things sensors do. After some coping with Intuitive's manner of playing the game, sensors started to sound their unhappiness out loud. Usually, a kind of compromise was temporarily achieved. Intuitives speed up their autistic instructions, started to fantasize and reflect less, and joined forces with sensors to, quote, play together. Soon, however, it resulted with Intuitives being unhappy. Intuitives disliked being dragged to participate in monotonous activities that they failed to include into their visionary projects. In the end, everyone gets dissatisfied, people stop joining the game, and the playthrough ends. The second scenario of this intuitive sensor difference happened when there was no intention on sensor's side to drag everyone into, quote, playing together. In that case, the intuitives kept playing in their own way and sensors kept going as they wanted separately. The cooperative part of a sandbox game ended there, and everyone played the game they wanted. Either way, the group gets separated. The intuitives enter their own worlds, and sensors follow the rules set by the creators of video games. The fate of the playthrough in this scenario usually depends on who gets bored first. If the intuitives are not inspired by their projects enough, they start to drop out of the server, and then the sensors play until they are bored or until they finish their progression. The other way around, the server turns into a creative playground where lone intuitives invent and construct, meeting each other to show their creations to each other. This small tale is not merely a story about experience in playing video games online. It is, in a way, a story of the entire society. The sensors are, on one hand, inherently conservative, but on the other hand, they are the foundation of coherent social fabric. Sensors can be very different, but all are conservative in two different ways. The perceiver sensors, such as the entertainer, entrepreneur, or even the adventure personality type, tend to live in the present and, or, focus on acquiring, quote, small joys of life. Living like that means accepting the existing social and political order, because living in the present means absence of a long-term plan, which means short-term thinking, which means going day to day without critical perception, which means conservation of perceiver sensors' place in the world. Even the ambitious sensor perceivers, such as the entrepreneur or ESTP, are limited to the realm of material things. They are likely to jump from one material goal to other, never actually questioning what they do and why. In the end, they simply accept delayed capitalism and its endless hustling and their place in it. Sensors accept their place in society just as they accept their place in the vision of developers of sandbox games. The judging sensors, such as the administrator, the defender, or the executive, are far more straightforward in their conservatism in comparison to perceiver sensors. In most cases, these personality types, in their quest for predictability and stability, end up following every existing social standard. In the end, they often end up sticking to collective identities that were conceptualized long before their birth, such as family, nation, and the state. They are the ones who can be motivated by concepts like duty and tradition. Intuitives, on the other hand, have problems too. Even if they are extroverted and have large social circles, they tend to live in ideational castles, in their dreams. No one can truly share the dream of another intuitive. Every intuitive has some kind of an inner sanctum that only the chosen can access. But even those chosen who can get to the sacred shrines will not understand or disagree with some of other intuitives' ideas. Because of that, intuitives, with all their creativity, can't form communities that will be based on unconditional loyalty. If the only ideal world exists in your head, there is no need to cling to existing social order. Did you watch my video on freedom? If you didn't, I recommend looking at it. One of my thoughts in this essay was that pursuing freedom is not really a choice, but a result of inability to stick with existing social world anymore. I've seen people who were incapable of taking it any longer, and the majority of them were intuitives. In relationship between intuitives, there is always a need for philosophical, ideational agreement. Intuitives who are close friends are loyal to each other because they deeply respect something in another intuitive, or because they feel that they have a lot in common with that other intuitive. If the person changes and stops being interesting and worthy of respect from the point of view of creativity and intellect, the intuitives usually start criticizing each other, and the relationship between them is doomed at that point. Among intuitives, there is little conformity. Rarely there are values that function automatically in intuitives' heads because the society told them so through systems like general education. I think you can see where I'm getting at. The intuitives do not follow the accepted norms in the same way they do not follow the progression rules intended by developers of video games. Most revolutionary ideologues and leaders in the world history were intuitives. Robespierre, Napoleon, Garibaldi, Lenin, Ataturk, they were all intuitives. Intuitives are usually the one disagreeing with the state of the world they're in. They were all restless, pursuing their ideas and images of future society, putting tens, hundreds, sometimes millions of people at risk by their actions. All of them were not entirely understood or supported by their followers. I think now you can see why the difference between sensors and intuitives is so crucial. Cultural or national differences do not matter that much, because a logician type INTP from Germany will be able to sympathize with the INTP from Iran. I really doubt that this German INTP would find it that easy to sympathize with German ESTJ. Even the social class is not that important. Even if you are from a different social origin, if you are both sensors, you are likely to have crucial similarities in thinking and lifestyle, which would allow you to hold similar beliefs. Same works with intuitives. If your brains function in a similar way, and you develop values in accordance with tendencies launched by your cognitive organization, you will find common ground with another person, even if this individual has a different set of class interests. The MBTI, as a system of classification of personalities, is the one that treats the deep difference I described the best. Let me shortly compare it to another prominent system, the Big Five. The Big Five is the most popular system of personality testing in academic psychology. The Big Five measures your extroversion, which is self-explanatory, your neuroticism, meaning your level of psychological instability, openness, more on that later, agreeableness, which means high agreeableness might signify that you are too much of a conformist and a submissive person, while low agreeableness is a sign of callousness, narcissism, and aggressive individualism. And 5. Consciousness. Your level of organization, basically it is the same as judging versus perceiving in MBTI. My main problem with the Big Five is the concept of openness. In the Big Five, openness is used to distinguish imaginative, creative people from down-to-earth people. As you can clearly see, openness is the Big Five's version of intuition. There is already a problem with the word. It's not a good idea, from a conceptual point of view, to describe the tendency to be creative and imaginative, which is intuition in MBTI, as a part of openness. You can be creative, but you can also be an introvert who rarely leaves his dungeon. The word openness assigns unnecessary extroversive notions to the idea of creativity. In the Big Five, there is one component of openness that makes me raise my brow. It is a concept of adventurousness, a part of openness. High scorers on adventurousness are eager to try new activities, travel to foreign lands, and experience different things. They find familiarity and routine boring and will take a new route home just because it is different. Low scorers tend to feel uncomfortable with change and prefer familiar routines. So if you have a low score in adventurousness, then your openness score is lower, which means that you're considered less creative if you are less adventurous. I have a massive problem with this. The person's tendency to change routine, travel, and experience something new has nothing to do with creativity. There are a lot of very creative people who lead a lifestyle of a hermit, sticking to their routines and environment, who do not seek the change of scenery around them. Despite their lack of adventurousness, they are very imaginative and philosophical and score massively on other aspects of openness promoted by the Big Five. But despite their creativity, these people end up having their openness scores lower because of a strange decision to include adventurousness into the formula of openness. Furthermore, a lot of components that make up the concept of adventurousness, such as traveling to foreign lands, are clearly an attempt at legitimizing consumerist practice of mass tourism, a practice that was unavailable for the absolute majority of creative people until 19th and 20th centuries. If we accepted the use of this concept as one of the measures of creativity, then we would have to believe that great masters of Renaissance, who spent most of their lives in hometowns, were at least in some way less creative than some suburb middle-class Karen who got to travel around the world. In my opinion, MBTI handles this issue. In MBTI, adventurousness is clearly a trait that is considered in the fourth contradiction, judging versus perceiving, and has nothing to do with intuitiveness versus sensing. MBTI does a great job at showing the cognitive and social differences between intuitives and sensors, and because of that, I prefer it. However, in academia, the Big Five is preferred personality testing framework. Now, of course, there are some researchers like Dario Nardi who work actively with MBTI. The MBTI is also growing its presence in academic psychology in some separate countries, in South Korea for instance, where researchers produce a lot of interesting surveys based on MBTI and around perception of MBTI in society. However, on the whole, the academic psychology focused on the Big Five, while the MBTI received far more interest from the businesses for hiring purposes. Now, I understand that there are rational reasons for academic preference for the Big Five. The Big Five is a statistical model. It emerged in the world at the time where academic psychology sought to become a hard science with verifiable data, in order to transcend a popular sentiment against psychology as a non-scientific, unverifiable knowledge. But being convenient for quantification is not everything. MBTI really works. You can guess the type of your relatives, friends, and acquaintances and then give them the tests, and you will end up being right if you're using the methods correctly. I think that there are also other ideational reasons why academia in most countries does not prefer MBTI. Academic psychology in the developed world, and especially in its western part, is a discipline with two-sided ideological profile. On one hand, it is undeniable that most of academic psychologists, as academics in general, are a part of a progressive portion of their societies. On the other hand, they've internalized the whole discourse of seeking to become a hard science based on facts. Orientation on facts tends to kill ideas and also tends to push the separate humans and whole institutions to the political center. In essence, academic psychology is center-left. As a corporation with center-left views, academic psychology tends to naturally reject the fundamental idea of MBTI. that personality type is innate and unchanging. But why? I can only offer assumptions, so please don't take them as a final answer. I think that, on one hand, the center-left might reject the idea of innate personality types as potentially conservative and rightist, because it assumes rigid, caste-like hierarchical social structure where people of certain types assume specific functions in the society, which would result in prestigious roles being assigned to people of certain personality types, which would result in hierarchy of personalities. That's not really the case with most people in MBTI community, but this is how ideational logic might work in academic psychology's assessment of MBTI. On the other hand, centrists can't accept the idea of innate personality types because accepting it means the impossibility of defending the social order of late capitalism, which the hard science based on facts centrists inevitably defend. Why is that? The socio-economic system of late capitalism expects you to change career paths multiple times in your life. The idea of innate and unchanging personality types means that you are better in doing specific things and worse doing other things. In a sense, this idea limits your career choice. For example, if you're an INFP, probably no one in the community will recommend you to pursue electrical engineering as your career choice. If you're an INTJ, then chances are you really can't work with children, and so on. The MBTI as a system presumes that a healthy society is one where people can always do things they are naturally inclined to do, which is something that an intellectually honest centrist can't really believe. Okay, this series of thoughts was probably based on too many assumptions, but still, there is a visible contradiction between main idea behind MBTI and ideological tendencies within academic psychology. As people who mostly belong to the left, academic psychologists can't accept their supposedly feudalist notions within the MBTI, and as centrists, they are not ready to follow the socio-economic implications of MBTI, which are in contradiction with late capitalist society. That's all for today. I hope that I was successful in showing you the greatest cleavage among the human beings, and why the MBTI as a system works best with this cleavage. I recommend to all of you, my dear companions in thought traveling, to use various personality testing systems, especially MBTI, to lurk through the deepest and darkest corners of your souls. Self-reflection will free you from suffering and help you gain new friends. If you liked our little journey, please subscribe and stay around for more insights from Videological Dungeon.